You are now welcomed to Esoterica Unvarnished with Fade. This awesome dream sequence is going in-depth on conjuring success as a spiritual entrepreneur. No holds barred adventures into what it takes to cut it in the world as a metaphysical professional will happen now, and Mal will tell you all about his long, hard journey as a metaphysical professional and spirit guide. This is Conjuring Change for Success.
We have Mal. We have Mark Angelo Lyons, the incredible. We cannot believe how lucky we are to have him on Esoterica Unvarnished.
Mal and I jumped right into the topic of metaphysical entrepreneurship by noting our work on LinkedIn, the online career networking app. Few metaphysical entrepreneurs really take this venue as seriously as they should, for how much magic our community can work with money.
Success and wealth in the metaphysical community will be the topic with my awesome new part-time co-host and friend. Mal runs a successful Facebook group, and along with myself and a few other luminaries, is daring to take magic to LinkedIn, the business community online. Now is a time for transformation for the attainment of our desires as a community. Radical change is in the air, isn't it? So Mal, we've discussed before the need for pagan business folk to come out of the broom closet as entrepreneurs. Both you and I are tackling LinkedIn and want to encourage other practitioners to do the same. Other intrepid guys I can't forget to mention is this guy named Lord Alexian, who is campaigning all by himself on the platform, like us with neo-pagan music. How long have you been a metaphysical entrepreneur, and what encouragement can you give others in that direction on Facebook and LinkedIn?
After that topical introduction, it became immediately clear how charmingly theatrical my awesome guest is.
Okay. Hi, and thank you so much for having me on. I give good interview. I've been interviewed a lot. You do you, I'll do me. That's collaboration. No, I have been doing this for a very long time. I am 53 years old. I know, I don't look at things.
He doesn't look it either.
But I really started very young. I've had different stages of spiritual awakening throughout my life. I mean, even the childhood stuff, but in 1987, 88, there was this thing called the harmonic convergence, another astrological event. Not going into it because there's a lot to unpack there.
Speaking of convergences, the interview took place on 15 degrees Scorpio Grand Cross of Changes. We decided easily to stick to the theme of business as a metaphysician and save the astrology for later, so Mal made clear his best advice for budding entrepreneurs of the craft.
You know, you can ask me, it's like, what is my advice? What is my advice is make sure that you are taking care of yourself and a grain of salt with everything that crosses your path. I'm from New York, so I'm sort of built that way. You know, it's like to be just skeptical a little bit more. I was raised by very intellectual people, so I call myself the white sheep of the family because it's all like lawyers and professionals and then me, although I call myself a professional witch. But, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the cliches are true. It's like, you have to believe in yourself.
This turned into an excellent segue for just how Mal started his uphill battle as a professional.
I was at the Boston Conservatory of Music, Dance, and Theatre in Boston, oddly enough, and one morning I sat up out of futon because it was the 80s, and it was like, what's going on? And just a series of events after that, I was what a shock. I was a musical theater major. No, hard to believe, impossible, but I was.
No, I totally believe it. I totally believe it. I do believe it.
Well, that's what I tell people. Once you've been 6 foot tall, Jesus on stilts in a modern dance piece and hitting the head with a rubber chicken in another one, this stuff's cake. It's like I have no stage fright. Leo Rising, big shock. But really within a year.
There you go.
I mean, I had already.
For those who don't know, Leo Risings are theatrical captains and social leaders. The rising sign is not the same as your monthly zodiac sign, but the position of all 12 signs in your chart based on time of birth. Mal has a sun sign of Virgo, so his life is a scramble to set things in order, but his rising shows he is a leader by nature, and very gregarious.
I had already been reading tarot. I started when I was 12 years old. I love the tarot. I'm doing it on YouTube and taking clients all over the world now, thanks to the pandemic. It's a weird way to. But when you read clients, from people who've never seen the card before to people who know everything about it. You have to meet people.
Oh, totally.
But I will say, my first metaphysical job was soon after that, working in a teeny tiny little crystal store in Porter Square called Allura. It no longer exists. It was a very, very long time ago. But right down the street from a place which I hope still exists called Arsenic and Old Lace, the first witch store I had ever seen in my life. It's a little famous in the area, but I doubt it's still around. Very goth. They have an
absence. I'm sure they do.
Yeah, and they were great. And that's where I learned crystals, right? I learned crystals and minerals, and it was my first exposure to what at the time was called the New Age. I know it's still around, but it was really New Age in the 80s. And oh my God, the crazy that I was exposed to that at, I guess I was 18 years old, 19 years old, whatever. I just absorbed it all.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Really, I've been exposed to a lot, but I've really grown and developed spiritually, which I was going to do anyway. But working in the industry, I got to see a lot of crazy along the way. Not so much in the belief systems and the philosophies, although there's a lot of that I don't want to talk about. But in terms of the personalities that I dealt with, and so you can ask me, it's like, what is my...
That got us to talking about the effects of being disenfranchised as a community. When a community has no resources or support, a lot of mental divergence shows up because everyone is odd person out and struggling. This is not evidence against a community, but evidence of the state of things at the moment.
Well, Mel, do you think it's possible that the reason that the New Age movement was so crazy is just because it was so unsupported and new? I mean, maybe not because we are crazy as a community, because I know we're not, but man, when you're not a part of an established community that's been existing for a long time, you're part of a disenfranchised community, and you're trying to make it, there's a lot of creepy stuff going on.
I think there's a lot of factors that went into the rise of the New Age, a perfect storm, if you will. Yeah. Like, for example, the Reagan era. Mm-hmm. There was so much tension. I mean, like now, but very, very different, right? AIDS was in full swing. I mean, I grew up where I'm gay, by the way. You couldn't tell. Yeah. But, I lived under that terror of even, like, kissing people was at one point. That was the crazy that was being said.
They didn't know back then.
And not to mention, it was the me decade. So everybody was doing what they had to do. Yeah. And party hard, and greed is good, and more. There's a great line from Postcards from the Edge by Carrie Fisher. She's a writer. I can't believe a lot of people don't know she was a writer. I love her. I consider her a spirit guide at this point, because sometimes I just hear her in my head.
I've heard she's really wise.
How could she not be with all she'd been through?
The 80s truly were a time of creative static, and intense change was brewing beneath the surface of a seemingly superficial rebellion. Each age builds on the other, and our 21st century stands in the decades of the 20th.
Right? The things that everybody else pretty much was, depending on your genetic lineage, blah, blah, blah. So I think there was also some boredom that was going on in the world, because all of that 80s stuffing your senses as much as you can, it created this emptiness inside that by the 90s,
almost like a static in the air. I remember that growing up in the 80s. I grew up in the 80s. I was born in the 80s. Yeah. And I remember it was a very, very spacey time. There was just so many colorful, bizarre things going on, but also kind of a static in the air, like, what's going to happen? What's supposed to happen?
And I think repression eventually creates progression, right? I think just how it goes. If you ever get to read the book, Postcards from the Edge, says instant gratification isn't fast enough. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's the 80s. It's like that. So, but also I do think it was just the evolution of human consciousness, right? We could go back to the Theosophist movements, right? Helen Blavatsky and all of that. And then we could look at the beat poets in the 50s and in the 60s. And then the punk movement. See, a lot of spirituality came out, we'll talk about the United States, but certainly came from other places, particularly from the Eastern philosophies. I mean, Maharishi Mahesh Yoga, we saw hanging out with the Beatles, or really more, they were hanging out with him.
So people really know about that part, but they don't know how much the cyberpunk era influenced modern, neo-pagan thought and everything. All the different eras that you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, then you can talk about, BTW, British Traditional Wicca, which, Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valiente and just all of the derivations. I wouldn't say Wicca exploded, but all of the hidden pockets of magical people, whether they identified as pagans, because a lot didn't.
So maybe it took root.
Right, well, but it was underground.
This brings us to the notion of culture as an inner manifestation of the cosmic world tree. The civilization is an extension of organic physics and mimics plant-like ecosystems in the way it develops.
It was underground anyway. It was underground for hundreds and in some cases thousands of years.
That bud is starting to break ground right now, and everybody's like, can I do this? Can I be this?
But that's the thing. It's like the pagan community. See, I live on Long Island. Raymond Buckland, one of his priests, moved to Long Island, to Bayshore, where I still live. Now, I don't know if we ever lived there at the same time. I was a little kid, even if that was true, I think. So Long Island, he made high priestesses like a lawn sprinkler, right? So there's all this like hidden
analogy. Oh my God!
Right? He had a witchcraft talk about pagan entrepreneur. He had a magic and witchcraft museum on Long Island. So,
and surely enough, the 90s were a new age slingshot from those roots sprouting from that static.
So, it's like pulling an arrow back. It takes a long time to pull that arrow back, but then once it flies, it flies. And that's why, punk gave way to new wave, and then alternative music, college rock, right? So there's this evolution always going on creatively and spiritually.
Yeah.
But also, publishers started putting out material that had not been seen by the majority of humanity, let alone...
Yeah, people underestimate how creative that time period was, especially for sci-fi and fantasy genres. But every genre, every culture, there was a lot going on.
It was about at that time that a deluge of new age and metaphysical publications hit the market in droves, and a lot of big names in esoteric literature became established. Modern authors like Chris Allen, whom I interviewed last year, springboarded off of these copious publications, carving out their own 21st century niche on the 90s wave.
Well, the first book I had ever read on witchcraft proper was Earth Power by Scott Cunningham, and I love Scott Cunningham. An eclectic. He really took from everywhere they could to learn, which I don't think you can get away with anymore.
Yeah.
I'm all down for respecting cultural things. I have to walk a path of respect. I know what it's like to be disrespected, so I do my best, particularly with cultural stuff. But at the time, there was just none of that.
It was about at this time that Mal was finding himself body, mind, and soul, as he realized it was about time for him to be an independent metaphysical entrepreneur himself.
Station called Body, Mind, and Soul in 1990. Body was a vitamin store, mind was a bookstore, and soul was food. Unfortunately, it wasn't soul food; it was health food, which whatever. So I got hired to work in mind. So the books, everything from Helen Blavatsky, everything from Freemasonry to witchcraft. That's when The Power of the Witch by Laurie Cabot came out. Like, I had a copy, one of the original runs of that book.
That must have been really empowering at that time. Must have been like, oh my gosh, I have this book and it tells me.
Well, so it's this is the kind of empowering, but an
empowerment, a power building up inside you, like, oh, maybe I can be powerful, but when?
An extremely powerful cultural trend was about to emerge, with a lot of money placed on the spiritual moniker.
And people's heads now would explode at that kind of thing. Feng Shui came to Long Island, and you would pay $5,000 to have your home feng shuied, and now there's an app for that, right?
Yes.
So, of course, it was the 80s into the 90s, and this over commercialization of it. But that's where we were, right? So if something, you know, something made you look younger, but I don't know, you turned into a wildebeest for 2 hours a night, you can still make money with it, right? It's like market up, sell it.
Yeah,
right?
And selling like hotcakes basically at the time because there was such a need there. You know, people felt that.
But then, like any pendulum swing, the new age got dull as the 90s went on, and we sort of went right back in the opposite direction, right? Yeah. So that's why I'm going to say, like, the cliche things people say about being an entrepreneur: believe in yourself, right? Just do the best.
This is not very step-by-step instruction. It's just like, believe in yourself. Okay.
Well, but the psychological part is important. It really is, because you're going to come across people. I mean, when someone's calling you a Satanist, and I'm not a Satanist, but I know Satanists. It's like none of them have ever crossed my path in a bad way. So blessed be, whatever. I'm good. Whatever you do. But if you come from me or my cats or my mom, I will hex you for both.
Obviously, cultural misunderstanding is a huge issue with the metaphysical community's public reputation, as there is a huge knowledge gap between someone called to the path and an average everyday consumer. You therefore need to be extra patient and confident in the face of non-acceptance.
People are coming at you and saying that you're going to hell. Because, well, being gay, being a witch, take on the hatred double feature act here.
You're kind of quadruple screwed in that situation,
right?
And you're trying to be an entrepreneur,
right? And then try and make a living, you know. So it was very. It's a tricky thing, but I mean, I went from job to job to job, but the connecting line through it was always this piece of spirituality. Let's leave that word very general for a moment, because I ended up working at Borders Books and Music. Oh my God, what was that? 1996, maybe? The dates come and go. My resume reads like fiction. But I worked in their Poets Corner, which is where all the philosophy and religion and the New Age books were. And I knew them, not all of them, but I knew the majority of them. And the ones that I didn't know and were drawn to, I got to read.
The change was still in the air as the engines of fate moved forward, and the dry spell was only a quiet boundary of a permanent cultural industry.
The mid-90s was kind of like a quiet turning point for the whole neo-pagan movement, I think. It's like when it kind of sedimented and took root, and people said, you know, this is here, we don't know what to make of it, but now it is here.
Well,
it is here.
I call it the great, the great witch book deluge of the 1990s. It felt like Llewellyn was cranking stuff out like a different witch book every day, which is great. It had like Harper San Francisco working with certain witches. Be a Goddess, Francesca de Grandis was big. I met her, I worked with her briefly. So by the time I was burnt out on corporate America's Borders Books and Music, I was what was called the CRC, Community Relations Coordinator. I did events and all that stuff. I really burned out, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And one night, the gods sort of came to me and they said, start your own gig, kid. So I did on the day of my Saturn return, some point in April 1998. I drove out and I got my DBA for Drawing the Circle Productions. There's a long story there, but I have never been unemployed since. Being self-employed, make sure you're never unemployed.
Well, you're a real trailblazer for that. I mean, that was a hard era to do that. You are. I mean,
and you know, but with seat of the pants. But every day to this day starts with some kind of spiritual practice. I can't do the same spiritual practice for 20 plus years every single day. So I am a true eclectic, and I don't care what people think about eclectic witches. I will beg, borrow, and steal from whatever works to get me through the day, but I don't always turn around and then teach it or turn it into merchandise, right?
Which brings us to eclecticism, which means drawing from many paths. Eclecticism is far more common in the metaphysical community, especially amidst solitaries. Most practitioners are or have been solitary seekers at some point in their lives.
I mean, the whole eclectic thing is the next step because I mean, there are eclectic everything these days. We really can't help it. It's something that we all have to come to bear with, that we have to be eclectic to survive, not just that we want.
I think if we want to have more unity on the planet,
yeah,
we can find a common thread. I'm a mystic.
Yeah.
It's a tricky word. It's not all Stevie Nicks, although blessed be Stevie Nicks.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, but it means somebody who cultivates a mysterious and intimate relationship with the divine. Pick your variable of what you want to call the divine. But I was shown very, very early on my spiritual path. I don't have great, big, huge, mystical, like Broadway show type visions. I get like 3 seconds. It's all I get.
In closing thoughts for this episode, we realized the importance of being flexible with your niche. Niche marketing is important, but we must also be adaptable as we aim to be authentic to our market. These were Mal's closing thoughts for this topic, but more amazing episodes are now in the works.
As an entrepreneur, you have to at least be open, like, to try everything at the buffet to see what works for you personally. Because if you're only going to work with pagans, like, you've already cut your market down drastically. But then if you're only going to deal, let's just go there, with Wiccans, then that's another teeny tiny part of it. But then if you're only going to go with, BTW, right, like Gardnerian lineage, I mean, your market is teeny tiny, itty bitty, with an internet now where you can do business all over the world.
More awesome episodes are ahead. If you would like to be featured on this fledgling coast-to-coast experience, smash that like button and contact myself, Iris B. Fade, aka Bradley Williams, and or Mark Angelo Lyons on Facebook. We are here for you now. It is important to remember the size of your market as well as other markets in the karmic scheme of reality. The more you circulate goodwill in the world, the more circulates back. Sarfo Dice is currently a teacher in Ghana working all by himself to educate and fund starving children. If you would like to help him in this, he aims to come to America to campaign for a better Africa. This has been episode 1 of Esoterica Unvarnished, Conjuring Change for Success with Mal. Subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes from Faye, the Wizard of Arcane Lore. Also remember to purchase the Fairy Threads by Christian Fales, handwoven scarves inspired by past lives in another world.